everyone, hope all of you are doing super well. And in this video, I'll be giving you some information on how to assess risks as part of the strategy analysis. So, if you haven't taken a look at what strategy analysis is, how do you define the current and future state, then I've taken videos on that and I'll add the links to the description box. You can take a look at them. So, without any delay, let's get into it. So, what is the purpose of assessing risks whenever you want to bring about a change? Okay, so it's important to understand potential impact of those forces. It could either be internal or external. And in the previous videos, I mentioned what internal and external influences could be, and it can be used to make a recommendation about a course of action. So we just don't identify risks. We want to understand what is the impact of those risks. Based on that impact, we'll be able to take up certain decisions and even make certain recommendations is how we can proceed with it. So when we say assessing risks, it includes both analyzing as well as managing them. Okay, so when you are analyzing risks, you need to check for what are all the possible consequences if a particular risk occurs, and also what is going to be the impact of those consequences. Okay, there's some consequences, and if it's going to be of a great impact, then that's not likely to be taken. The next one is you want to even understand what is the likelihood of that risk taking place, and then you would want to even check what is going to be the potential time frame when the risk might occur. So all these informations will enable you and the also stakeholders and the team to analyze and see how well these risks can be mitigated and reduced, or even taking into consideration this information, they might want to say whether they should proceed or not with the change. So, as part of assessing the risks, you need to first take in as an input, you need to check all the influences, the internal and external influencers. You want to take in all the information that you gathered from elicitation, and that information should be confirmed once. You want to take into consideration the designs, you want to check on the requirements that were defined, what is the business objective, and what is the potential value of achieving this particular change. So, all this information you need to take into consideration when you're assessing the risks. And as part of the output, you would come up with the risk analysis results. So, there are certain guidelines and tools that you can use to assess the risk. First one is the business analysis approach. I've taken a video on this if you want to know more. I'll add the link to the description box. So, the next one is business policies. You want to check what are all the existing business policies, what is the change strategy, and how have we defined the change strategy, because it needs to be in alignment with the change strategy. Current state description. So as I said, to identify the risks involved, you need the current as well as the future state. It not only tells you what are the gaps and what are the transition states that need to be gone through in order to achieve that future state. So if you want to know what current and future states are, the link is in the description box again. You need to check on the identified risks. So, as part of defining future states and the transitions between that, there would be some areas and sometimes when already risks would have been identified. So, you want to take up those risks and you want to keep them for your assessment. And the last one is stakeholder engagement approach, because this enables you to engage with stakeholders in order to assess the risks and to get more information from that in this entire process. So I've even taken another video on stakeholder engagements. I don't want to repeat anything over here, guys, because the video is kind of getting too long and lengthy and then you would get bored. So I'm trying to keep it as short as possible. So when doing this risk analysis, the first one you want to check are what are the unknowns. So you, as a business analyst, you need to collaborate with stakeholders to assess this risk based on what is a current understanding. It's not based on your current understanding, it's based on the team, the stakeholders' current understanding. So they would have certain, understandings that they would have experienced, and they would have their own knowledge that they would share on that particular risk. So you would also want to consider other historical contexts from similar situations to assess the risks. Okay, so that's where you go back and you check what are all the situations where this risk would have occurred, how do teams mitigate that risk, how do they manage it when these risks occur, things like that you would want to check out. The next one is constraints, assumptions, and dependencies. So don't always think, as especially when you're assessing risks, constraints, assumptions, and dependencies, they could be risks on their own. Okay, so it's always well to restate these constraints, assumptions, and dependencies as a risk on its own. Now, why do we say that it is a risk on its own? Let's say you're making certain assumptions to achieve that future state. Okay, or there are some dependencies. What happens if the assumptions are not as per your expectation? What happens if it is invalid? It's a risk because there might be some impact with that. If there are certain dependencies, okay, you can't expect always that dependency to go smoothly. There could be some hiccups, there could be some halts. Then what happens? So it's always important that you even restate these assumptions, dependencies, and any constraints as well as risks, because you know you'll be able to come up with a decision and a plan as to a recommendation how you can mitigate that if that ever occurs. The next one is negative impact to the value. You want to check what is the negative impact that risk could potentially create. So, business analysts clearly identify and express each risk and estimate its likelihood and the impact to determine the level of risk. So, in a change initiative, there would be multiple risks. So, you need to find out the likelihood of the individual risks and what are the impacts of the risk. Okay, then you'll be able to determine the level of risk. So, at the end, when we talk about that entire change on its own, we need to create and come up with an aggregate of all the set of risks and indicate the potential impact for the risk being assessed. So, overall, when they say, is this change risky? You'll be able to say whether it's risky or not by you coming up with an aggregate set of risks. Okay. The next one is risk tolerance. So, after identifying these risks, okay, assessing these risks, you need to again collaborate with stakeholders and understand what is going to be their risk tolerance. So basically there are going to be three attitudes towards risk. The first one is risk aversion, which means that very unwilling to accept much uncertainty. Okay, either they are not willing to even accept any uncertainty, or if you say risk then they are all out of it. There might be certain preferences to avoid any course of action, okay, which carries sometimes, if it's too much of risk, what happens? They might start to invest more to reduce the risks, okay, because they are so scared and averse towards this risk. The second type of attitude is neutrality. So it's some level of risk is acceptable, okay, provided that the course of action does not result in a loss even if the risk occurs. Okay, so they are okay with some amount of risk, but if that risk occurs, it shouldn't lead to a loss. There should be some potential benefits after being able to manage those risks. Okay, and the third one is risk seeking. This group of people with the attitude, they are willing to accept or even take on more risks in return for a higher potential value. Okay, something like stock markets, investment, things like that. Okay, so you need to identify what is the attributes towards these risks, and because only based on these attributes you'll be able to understand what are going to be the recommendations, whether to go ahead with the change or not. So the recommendation usually falls into one of the following categories. One is whether to pursue the benefits of a change regardless of the risk, or pursue the benefits of a change while investing in reducing the risk, the likelihood, or the impact. Go ahead. Seek out ways to increase the benefits of a change to outweigh the risks. So, though we are taking up this risk, still the benefits are tremendous. That's what it states. Identify the ways to manage and optimize these opportunities of these risks happening. And the last one is not at all. No going ahead with the change if it has so much of risks. Okay. Do not pursue the benefits of a change. So by now, I think you would understand why is it important to assess the risks, because this stage will help stakeholders define and decide if they should go ahead with the change or not. And when do you assess these risks? As I mentioned, whenever you decide, come up with a few current state and future state, if there are going to be a lot of uncertainties and gray areas in that stage, you would definitely want to identify the risks, because you don't want to go ahead with so much of uncertainty, because it's going to lead to risk at some point of time. Okay, so that's why we want to assess the risk well ahead of time, so that we are prepared and well planned for it. So that's all I have for this risk assessment, and if you found this video helpful, please do give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe to this channel, and also do share your feedbacks. Thank you.